Before life ever stirred, before a single cell dared to divide, Earth was shaped by oceans that rose from fire, endured storms of stone, and waited in silence for their future guests. Hello there, and welcome to the Late Night Scientist channel. Tonight, we drift back through those ancient waters, watching the planet cool, the sky clear, and the seas gather the chemistry that would one day spark everything we know. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let the story of Earth's first oceans guide you into the quiet beginnings of our world. We begin with a young Earth, not blue, not quiet, not even properly solid. This is a planet still deciding whether it wants to be a planet at all. Its surface glows like a furnace door left ajar, an unbroken skin of molten rock stretching from horizon to horizon. There are no oceans here yet, not even puddles pretending to be hopeful. What exists instead are oceans of magma, thick and restless, rolling slowly beneath a sky that barely deserves the name. Gravity, newly assembled from chaos, is still practicing. It pulls inward, but unevenly, gathering mass that only recently stopped wandering the solar system as loose debris. Earth has formed from collisions, countless impacts piling material together in an act that looks suspiciously like cooperation, but feels more like exhaustion. Every strike adds heat. Every collision resets the surface. Just when the crust begins to stiffen, another impact arrives to remind it not to get comfortable. The planet glows red-orange, not from sunlight, but from its own internal energy. Heat rises everywhere. Rock flows like liquid. Mountains cannot exist yet because nothing stays upright long enough to be called a mountain. The surface is an idea in progress, constantly erased and rewritten by motion below. Above this molten world hangs a sky that is not blue, not gray, but dim and chaotic. There is no breathable air, no clear boundary between surface and atmosphere. Gases boil out of the interior, hydrogen, carbon compounds, traces of water vapor, but they do not linger politely. Much of it is stripped away by solar radiation, lost to space before it can settle into anything resembling weather. If you were standing here, which evolution strongly advises against, you would not hear waves or wind. You would hear the low, endless sound of rock shifting beneath itself, a deep planetary groan. Earth is not serene, it is irritated. It has just finished assembling itself and is already overheating. Time behaves strangely in this chapter of Earth's story. Days are shorter. The planet spins faster, still carrying the momentum of its violent assembly. There is no stable rhythm yet, only rotation without rest. The sun rises and sets quickly over a surface that looks the same no matter the hour, glowing, fractured, and impatient. And still, despite the chaos, something important is happening. Heavy materials, iron and nickel, are sinking inward, pulled by gravity toward the planet's center. Lighter materials rise toward the surface. This slow sorting begins to shape Earth's internal layers, core, mantle, and the first hints of crust. It is not neat, it is not finished, but it is decisive. The planet is learning how to be structured. This internal organization matters, though no one is around yet to appreciate it. The churning interior generates immense heat, but also motion. Convection begins deep below the surface, setting the stage for processes that will later shape continents and basins. For now, it only ensures that nothing stays still, not rock, not heat, not the planet's own mood. There is still no water as we would recognize it. Any liquid water that might briefly appear is instantly vaporized, torn apart by heat before it can pool or flow. The idea of an ocean exists only as a future possibility, written somewhere in the chemistry of the planet, waiting for conditions to calm down enough to read it aloud. Impacts continue, large ones. The surface bears scars that never heal, because healing requires time, and time here is constantly interrupted. Each collision sends shockwaves through the molten mantle, splashing magma into space before gravity pulls it back down again. Earth is repeatedly wounded and immediately cauterized. And yet, beneath the violence, the planet persists. It holds together. It keeps its mass. It continues to cool, however slowly, radiating heat outward into space. This cooling is uneven and frustratingly gradual, but it is relentless. Physics, unlike meteors, does not get tired. This is not a world meant for comfort or life. It is a workshop, a furnace, a testing ground where materials are melted, mixed, and rearranged until only the stable combinations remain. Earth is failing forward, discovering what does not work by doing it loudly. In this earliest chapter, there is no blue, no calm, no water whispering against stone. There is only a planet trying to solidify, trying to cool, trying to stop glowing long enough to become something else. Earth attempts being solid for the first time and immediately regrets it, slumping back into molten habits like a creature not yet ready to stand. But it keeps trying. And in that persistence, beneath the magma, beneath the impacts, beneath the noise, the conditions for oceans are quietly, inevitably being prepared. The young Earth is no longer the blazing cauldron it once was, though cooling here is a relative term, like saying a bonfire is calm after you stop throwing logs into it. The surface still radiates heat, but it has slowed its frantic shimmering and begun forming patches of solid ground, fragile and temporary. These first crustal plates are thin skins of dark rock floating over a mantle that burbles and heaves like something olive. They crack easily. They melt easily. And most importantly for us, they leak. Everywhere, volcanoes rise like valves stitched into a planet still full of pressure. They erupt not in brief, dramatic bursts, but in long, sustained exhalations. Through countless vents, towering cones, fractured ridges, and glowing fissures, the interior of the Earth releases the gases it has been storing since birth. These eruptions are not just scenery. They are the architects of the first real atmosphere. Water vapor pours out in staggering volumes, rising into an air that barely exists yet. Carbon dioxide follows, along with nitrogen, sulfur compounds, and a scattering of exotic gases that rarely make appearances on modern Earth outside chemistry labs. The sky absorbs all of it greedily. It has no reason to be picky. It is just forming, layer by layer, an invisible archive of the planet's earliest breath. The transformation from barely there haze to a thickening heavy dome happens gradually, but from the ground it would feel monumental. At first, the sky is dark, a charcoal vault smeared with volcanic ash that refuses to settle. As more gases accumulate, the color shifts subtly. Hints of red, brown, and orange mingle with suspended particles, scattering sunlight in strange directions. The result is a sky that looks less like a sky and more like a ceiling painted by someone who ran out of blue pigments entirely. Clouds emerge as the water vapor cools, forming dense layers that drape themselves across the horizon. These clouds are not gentle cotton shapes drifting in a quiet atmosphere. They are thick, churning blankets, heavy with unshed rain. They tower upward in stacked columns, fed from below by the heat rising from the crust, and from above by the cooling that comes with growing distance from the surface. The entire atmosphere behaves like a pot of soup on a stove. Constant circulation, constant mixing. If the newborn ocean is still somewhere in the far future, the sky is already preparing for its role. It collects moisture with the single-minded enthusiasm of something expecting a dramatic release. Indeed, the atmosphere begins hoarding water vapor like it's preparing for a very long cry, gathering tears it hasn't yet learned how to shed. Volcanic outgassing shapes not just the sky, but the world's temperature. Carbon dioxide traps heat efficiently, forming a natural insulation system around the young planet. Infrared radiation, trying its best to leave, finds itself repeatedly bounced back toward the surface, thickening the warmth. The Earth is no longer glowing, but it is far from cool. The atmosphere acts like a shroud, holding heat close and keeping the crust from freezing into calmness too quickly. Yet for all its heaviness, this early sky is alive with motion. Winds sweep across molten plains, driven by temperature contrasts that shift hour by hour. Hot air rises violently from volcanic hotspots. Cooler air plunges downward in its place. Clouds gather, disperse, reform, and collide. These are not the well-regulated climate patterns of mature planets. These are experimental drafts, weather attempting to invent itself for the first time. Each volcanic eruption adds another layer to the sky. You can almost imagine the atmosphere as a collector of geological gossip. Every vent, every fissure, every plume contributes stories from the interior, spreading their chemical secrets overhead. Some gases linger, building up into lasting atmospheric components. Others react with sunlight and rock, transforming the surface in subtle ways. Sulfur creates brief, ghostly veils of haze. Carbon compounds drift outward until ultraviolet rays break them apart. And through all this, Earth is becoming wrapped in a new kind of identity. The atmosphere is no longer something negligible or transient. It is a full partner in shaping the planet's character. It regulates temperature. It filters sunlight. It blurs the boundary between rock and space. It becomes an active environment rather than a passive byproduct. But what it does most profoundly is prepare for rain, not a passing shower, not a seasonal downpour. The sky is building toward an event the planet has never experienced. a sustained release of stored water vapor that will ultimately remake everything on the surface. The clouds grow denser, the air grows thicker, the world grows dimmer beneath an atmosphere that seems to sag with anticipation. There is no blue yet, no clear horizon, no sound of falling drops. Only the quiet pressure of moisture suspended in waiting, like tears caught on the brink before a sob. This is Earth learning the first hints of weather, not the gentle drift of breezes or the play of sunlight on waves, but the raw mechanics of condensation, convection, and atmospheric weight. The planet is practicing, building, and preparing. A grand transformation is taking shape above, though the ground below still trembles with every volcanic sigh. Soon enough, the sky will open. But for now, in this moment suspended between fire and future water, the atmosphere simply gathers itself, holding the promise of the oceans still to come. The sky, swollen with the weight of countless centuries of volcanic breath, finally reaches a threshold it can no longer tolerate. What began as a haze, then thickened into dense clouds, now becomes a single, planet-wide decision. It starts to rain. And once it begins, it does not stop. Not for days, not for years, but for thousands of years. A drumming, ceaseless deluge that transforms the young Earth more thoroughly than any impact or eruption ever could. The first drops fall cautiously, almost experimentally, sizzling as they strike the still hot surface. They evaporate instantly, torn apart by lingering heat from below. But the rain does not give up. The atmosphere has stored too much water vapor for too long. It is determined to empty itself. Soon, drops become sheets, and sheets become a descending curtain of water so thick one could barely see meters ahead, if anyone had existed to try. As the downpour strengthens, the cooling accelerates. Each drop absorbs a thread of heat from the ground before returning to the sky as vapor, only to condense again and fall once more. This cycle happens endlessly, a persistent tug-of-war between fire and water. The crust hisses under the assault, cracking as it contracts. Steam rises everywhere, merging with new rainfall in a swirling ballet of vapor and condensation. It is as if the entire planet has become an enormous kettle, boiling furiously while the cosmic stove begins lowering its flame. Eventually, the crust cools enough for water to linger. Puddles appear, shallow, brief, constantly displaced by the uneven landscape. But they are a promise of what's coming. As the planet's surface loses more heat, the puddles merge, forming temporary pools that persist long enough to gather sediment and carve exploratory paths down slopes of fresh, unweathered rock. The rain intensifies still further. Lightning forks through the heavy clouds, illuminating the steam like glowing veins. Thunder rolls across the landscape in long, low rumbles that echo between mountains newly born from volcanic upheaval. This is no gentle storm cycle. This is atmosphere, gravity, and chemistry engaging in their first true collaboration. Rainwater, once hesitant, now falls with commitment, hammering cliffs, prying open fissures, and smoothing jagged surfaces. With every passing century, the crust buckles under erosion. Rainwater rushes downhill in torrents, carving canyons where none existed, sculpting plains and gouging depressions destined to become something far larger. The landscape reshapes itself with unnecessary enthusiasm, as though competing with the sky to see which can transform the world more dramatically. In these early days of falling water, the very concept of a river is being invented. Water races through random channels, testing paths, abandoning them, choosing new ones, gradually finding routes that carry it from highlands to lowlands with increasing efficiency. None of these rivers have names. They don't need them. Their purpose is simple: move water to the lowest places, deepening them in the process. Low basins begin to fill. Depressions, formed from cooling crust and softened by erosion, gather water in amounts no storm could evaporate quickly. Small lakes form first, then expand as the rain continues its relentless descent. Over millennia, these lakes coalesce into sprawling, interconnected bodies, proto-oceans, though still young and restless, lacking the stability they will one day possess. The atmosphere feeds them constantly. Rain falls not only vertically, but slanted by winds that rush around the planet in turbulent loops. Waves begin to appear, not the gentle rolling kind we know today, but chaotic sloshing triggered by wind, thermal currents, and still settling crust beneath. Even so, they signal a shift. Water is not merely collecting anymore. It is starting to behave like a system. Where water lingers, it begins to cool the ground beneath it more efficiently than air ever could. Large pools become cold sinks, accelerating rock contraction and encouraging fractures. These fractures widen under the incessant weight of water, creating new routes for runoff and deeper cavities for liquid accumulation. Water, with no intent other than obeying gravity, becomes an accidental sculptor of basins. Meanwhile, the sky maintains its determined outpouring. Clouds replenish endlessly from the vapor rising off the hot surface. The cycle is self-feeding. Rain cools the land, but evaporation from heated regions ensures a continuous supply of moisture. It is a system stuck in a loop until, at last, the overall temperature of the planet drops enough to break it. But that moment lies far ahead. For now, Earth invents oceans simply by forgetting to turn off the rain. As centuries melt into millennia, the deluge begins achieving what no other force has. It creates stability, not through calm, but through accumulation. The first true oceans emerge not with graceful waves or gentle tides, but with sheer perseverance. Depth becomes possible. Shorelines, though irregular and temporary, begin to form. Vast regions of the surface take on the dark, reflective sheen of water under a heavy sky. The world grows quieter, not silent, never silent, but quieter. The steam no longer screams skyward. The crust no longer glows. The rain remains heavy. But its impact softens as more water stays pooled on the surface rather than bursting instantly back into vapor. Slowly, steadily, the planet cools into its new role. A world with oceans, still in their infancy, still warm and unsettled, but undeniably present. And the sky, having learned to weep so thoroughly, continues its long, patient cry, shaping the future with every falling drop. The rain has been falling for ages, and at last the world responds with a kind of weary acceptance. The ground, once too hot and too fragile to commit to any shape for long, has cooled enough to begin forming a crust that doesn't immediately collapse back into molten indecision. It thickens slowly, like a cooling glaze across a pot that's finally been taken off the fire. This crust is not yet trustworthy, but it is becoming something the water can negotiate with rather than simply evaporate from. Where the crust stabilizes, gravity takes up its quiet role as sculptor, smoothing jagged regions and guiding loose rock toward the lowest places. The early Earth was once a landscape of chaos: lava fields, uneven plains, newly cooled fractures. But gravity has a way of gently persuading the world toward curves. Surfaces slump, slopes soften, and the scattered depressions left behind by the planet's turbulent youth begin their transformation into genuine basins. Rainwater flows eagerly into these forming hollows, carving channels as it goes. What began as simple runoff now becomes persistent drainage systems. The water is learning its roots, selecting paths that deepen with every passing century. Gravity calls the water downward, and the water answers faithfully, carrying with it bits of weathered rock that further gouge the basins. Even without life, the planet is full of movement, full of systems that do not need intention to shape the world. As the crust cools more thoroughly, it shifts from a thin, uncertain rind into a sturdier shell. Beneath it, the mantle still churns, but less violently than before. This newfound stability allows the basins to deepen without collapsing. They become long-term residences for water rather than fleeting puddles. For the first time, the planet is able to keep what falls on it. Imagine a world slowly discovering its own bones. The crust stiffens, thickens, and gains resilience, but it does not do so evenly. Some regions cool faster, becoming early highlands. Others lag behind, sinking slightly under the combined weight of water and still soft rock beneath. These differences in cooling produce broad, sweeping depressions, proto-ocean basins that are deep enough to hold water even as heat continues to pulse faintly upward from below. The water, meanwhile, explores its new territory with cautious curiosity. It collects in the largest basins, spreading outward as more rain falls. The edges of these watery expanses are irregular, jagged in some places, gently sloped in others. The water tests each contour, lapping against warm rock, expanding when it can, withdrawing when it must. You can almost imagine the oceans getting a feel for the place, as though deciding which parts of Earth they want to claim. Steam still rises where water meets hotter regions of crust, but it no longer dominates the landscape. The planet has cooled enough that evaporation no longer outpaces accumulation. Lakes merge into vast, calm surfaces. Their reflections are dim, painted by a sky still dense with clouds. But the water persists, deepens, and stays. Over vast stretches of time, the basins continue their transformation. As more rock cools, its weight increases, pressing downward, and enhancing the curvature of these depressions. Meanwhile, the steady flow of rainwater transports sediments from highlands into the growing seas, lining the basin's floors with fine grains of mineral dust. These early sediments form layers, primitive records of the world's first attempts at shaping itself. The ocean's outlines shift constantly at first, their edges advancing and retreating with every subtle change in the crust. A slight uplift here reveals a peninsula. A gentle subsidence there invites the sea to reclaim territory. Nothing about this world is static, but gradually, stability wins small victories. One basin becomes noticeably deeper than its neighbors, drawing in more water and influencing the landscape around it. The beginnings of Earth's first true global-scale ocean take hold. Even wind, still experimenting with patterns, begins to shape these young waters. Breezes sweep across the broad surfaces, generating ripples that travel outward in widening rings. These small disturbances coax the oceans into a more cohesive identity. No longer caught only in vertical cycles of rain and runoff, water now learns horizontal movement, spreading, gliding, and responding to subtle shifts in elevation. The atmosphere plays its part as well. Its immense weight presses downward, keeping the surface of the oceans smooth and low-slung. It is not yet the crisp, airy atmosphere we know today. It is heavy, humid, and dim, giving everything beneath it a soft, muted tone. But within that mutedness lies a serenity Earth has never known before. The oceans, newly settled, stretch quietly under the thick sky, their surfaces broken only by the occasional ripple or the steady streams of rain. This stillness does not imply passivity. Beneath the surface, water explores deeper layers of crust, infiltrating cracks and cooling them further. Each intrusion encourages the crust to harden, reinforcing the basin's stability. Water becomes a collaborator in the world's solidification, a partner in shaping Earth's long-term geography. And so the oceans settle in, gently, experimentally, almost shyly. They test their boundaries, pressing against rocky edges, filling depressions, and withdrawing when met with rising ground. With each century, their shape becomes more certain. With each millennium, their depth grows more confident. For the first time, Earth holds its water in recognizable forms, wide expanses, curved basins, meaningful shapes. The oceans are no longer transient guests. They have found their early homes, and they are learning how to inhabit them. The oceans now rest in their newly carved basins, but they do so beneath a sky that feels more like a ceiling than an open vault. The early atmosphere presses down with a thickness that would feel almost physical, like walking underwater, except the water is above you and made of gases dense enough to slow a falling feather into a lazy drift. This sky is not breathable. It is not gentle. It is a massive, humid blanket of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, sulfur compounds, and a whole catalog of volcanic souvenirs still lingering from the planet's fiery adolescence. Sunlight, arriving from a young sun that shines weaker than the star we know today, struggles to penetrate this shroud. What little light filters through is scattered and diffused into a reddish-brown glow, giving the world a perpetual dusk. Shadows are soft, blurred by the hazy thickness overhead. The surface of the ocean reflects not blue, but a muted metallic sheen, like a great basin of warm liquid metal stretching beneath a dim lantern. And warm it is. These first oceans hold heat with startling efficiency. Between the residual warmth stored in the crust and the insulating atmosphere trapping infrared radiation, the water temperature sits near the edge of comfort for any theoretical visitor. Not boiling, those days are fading, but certainly closer to a planetary hot spring than a temperate sea. Currents move sluggishly in this heat, stirring minerals but never quite cooling enough to feel refreshing. This warmth encourages interaction between ocean and sky. The boundary where the two meet is a place of constant exchange. Gases dissolve easily into the water under such high pressure. Carbon dioxide slips beneath the surface with little resistance, replaced by more from the air above. Nitrogen dissolves slowly but steadily. Sulfur compounds enter in delicate trickles, sometimes forming faint layers near the surface before mixing deeper. The early ocean is becoming a chemical repository, an eager absorber of whatever the atmosphere provides. The ocean accepts everything the sky drops into it. No questions asked. If the atmosphere were a frantic collector emptying its pockets, the ocean would be the patient friend holding out its hands to catch the mess. As gases dissolve, they begin reacting with minerals already present in the water. Freshly weathered rock contributes ions of iron, calcium, magnesium, and silica. Under the weight of the atmosphere, these ingredients mingle with surprising enthusiasm. The ocean becomes a vast laboratory, one with no walls, no supervisor, and no particular objective except to see what combinations might arise. Chemical gradients form silently, like invisible borders drifting through the water. Warm, mineral-rich currents from near-shore regions meet slightly cooler, clearer waters further out, producing subtle layers in the ocean's character. The massive atmospheric pressure also forms a kind of lid, preventing bubbles from rising easily, keeping dissolved gases compressed, making the ocean feel heavier than its volume alone would suggest. Waves still form, stirred by experimental winds, but they move more languidly than the choppy seas of future eons. Everything here seems slowed, muted, functioning as though the entire planet is still catching its breath after the storm-filled ages that sculpted the basins. Above the water, the sky is restless. Chemical reactions unfold in the high atmosphere, driven by ultraviolet light that struggles but still manages to slip through. These reactions build temporary hazes, thin veils of organic compounds that tint the sky into deeper shades. At times, a yellowish glow pervades the horizon, born from sulfur aerosols drifting high. At other times, the atmosphere clears slightly, revealing a dimmer, filtered sunlight that brightens the surface of the ocean just enough to give it depth. Lightning crackles occasionally, illuminating the haze in electric flashes that reflect across the warm water. Each bolt marks another moment of atmospheric experimentation, splitting molecules, creating new ones, stirring the air into chemical complexity. Thunder follows, rolling across the ocean with a slow, muffled presence, softened by the heavy gases surrounding it. Yet despite these flashes of energy, the world remains calm in its broader mood. The crust no longer groans as frequently. The rain has slowed to a manageable rhythm. The oceans lie still enough to allow sediments to settle. Fine grains of mineral dust drift to the seabed, forming gentle layers that will someday become rock. But for now, they are simply soft blankets accumulating grain by grain across the basin floors. In deeper regions where sunlight never reaches, the water grows darker still. Pressure increases, squeezing molecules close together. Minerals seep up through cracks in the crust, spreading into the deep waters in faint plumes. These minerals do not yet form ecosystems. Life lies in the distant future, but they lay groundwork for chemical possibilities the planet will one day take advantage of. The atmosphere shields the planet from the harshest solar radiation, but not perfectly. High-energy particles still slip through, interacting with gases and water vapor to create fleeting molecules that drift downward, dissolving into the ocean with the same ease as everything else. The ocean collects these too, not because it needs them, but because it has no reason to refuse. Through all this, the sky remains heavy, pressing downward like the firm hand of a world still stabilizing. The ocean, warm and dark, rests beneath it with patient acceptance. There is no blue on Earth yet, no clear days, no bright horizons. But the pieces are assembling. The atmosphere is learning to regulate. The ocean is learning to hold memory. The chemistry between them deepens with every passing millennium. This is Earth in its quiet, formative stage, a planet sheltered under a heavy sky, gathering the ingredients of futures still unimaginable, one dissolved molecule at a time. The oceans, still warm beneath their heavy sky, have settled enough to begin an entirely new chapter, one not written in storms or shaping basins, but in the quiet drift of minerals slipping off the land and dissolving into the waiting water. The earliest rivers, narrow and uncertain, trickle across freshly cooled rock, carrying with them the planet's first true whispers of chemistry. These rivers are not the wide, meandering giants of later ages. They are small, experimental channels, following cracks and slopes in the crust, feeling their way across a world that has only just learned how to hold liquid water. As they flow, these rivers scrape particles from the land. Fresh rock, still young and reactive, weathers quickly under the touch of water. Each droplet pries loose microscopic fragments of minerals, tiny grains of calcium, magnesium, sodium, silica, and iron. These minerals tumble downstream, settling momentarily in quiet pools before being swept onward again, carried toward the growing basins that await them. The rivers, though thin, are persistent, and their burden of dissolved matter increases with every passing year. When the mineral-laden water finally enters the sea, it mixes hesitantly at first. Without established currents or tides, the ocean does not churn vigorously. Instead, it accepts the incoming minerals gently. allowing them to disperse slowly across the surface and sink at their own pace. It is a quiet process, no dramatic swirls, no powerful circulation, just a gradual infusion of the land into the sea. The earliest salts do not accumulate evenly. Some areas of the ocean, fed by active river systems, become pockets of concentrated minerals, while other regions remain startlingly fresh. The ocean has flavor now, but no recipe yet. No grand stirring spoon, no repeating tides to help distribute its new ingredients. It is seasoning itself in the most haphazard way possible, as though tasting each mineral and trying to decide whether to keep it. Sodium and chloride, the future architects of salinity, arrive in small amounts at first. Sodium loosens from feldspar grains. Chloride appears mostly through volcanic release and chemical reactions in seawater. When they meet, they bond readily, forming the simple but powerful union known as salt. But salt is not yet the dominant player. Magnesium and calcium attempt to steal the stage, drifting through the waters in high concentrations. Silica floats through in faint, shimmering traces. Iron, freshly eroded from the land, disperses invisibly into the depths. Each mineral, once separated from its rocky parent, enters the sea with no instructions on where to go. Some remain dissolved, content to drift. Others precipitate out when conditions change. Temperature shifts, pressure variations, the subtle chemistry of neighboring ions. The seafloor begins collecting these precipitates in delicate, thin layers, building up primitive chemical sediments. These deposits form gentle blankets of minerals that will one day become clues for scientists. But for now, they simply accumulate without witness. The absence of established ocean circulation shapes everything. Without tides tugging at the shoreline or steady currents sweeping across basins, the ocean remains a mosaic of different chemistries. One region may develop a faint bitterness from magnesium-rich inflow. Another may carry a metallic tang from dissolved iron. If the ocean had taste buds, it would be deeply confused, though perhaps pleasantly surprised. The sea is becoming salty, mostly from listening to rocks complain for millions of years. Rivers continue to contribute their cargo, gradually sculpting coastlines as they erode pathways toward the ocean. Each flood season, each storm, each shift in the developing landscape brings new material downstream. These early rivers lack the stability of later geological eras. A single earthquake can redirect a river entirely. A local collapse in the crust can create a new path overnight. The ocean stays patient, accepting water from whichever direction the rivers choose to approach. Over time, the dissolved minerals begin affecting the character of the water itself. Iron ions, drifting through the sea, lend certain regions a faint green tint. Silica molecules float suspended like invisible scaffolding, waiting for the distant future when life will learn how to use them. Calcium and magnesium compete constantly, each trying to saturate the water to its own preferred level. None of them have yet reached equilibrium. The ocean exists in a state of chemical experimentation, adjusting itself, grain by grain, ion by ion. Temperature variations help guide this chemical evolution. Warmer waters hold minerals differently than cooler regions. Near volcanic areas or tectonic vents, heat encourages minerals to dissolve more readily, increasing local concentrations. Further from these hotspots, cooler waters allow some minerals to settle, forming the earliest uneven gradients of ocean chemistry. The ocean, though still largely calm, begins developing identities, regions shaped by mineral influence rather than current patterns. And always more minerals arrive. It is a slow accumulation, but a steady one. Over millions of years, the ocean's chemical memory deepens. It remembers every river's contribution, every grain weathered from the land, every dissolved whisper of stone. But it has not yet learned consistency. Salinity is unstable, regions are chemically distinct, and balance is decades of millions away. Still, in this formative era, the ocean takes its first crucial steps toward becoming the complex chemical world it will one day host. It is learning, slowly, unevenly, and with no sense of urgency. After all, time is plentiful here, and the sea is patient. For now, it collects minerals the way a child collects pebbles, with enthusiasm, curiosity, and no real plan, yet. The oceans, gathering minerals and settling into their basins, have existed mostly as stillness, broad, quiet expanses content to rest under a heavy sky. But high above them, something else has been taking shape. A companion, large enough to matter, close enough to be impossible to ignore. The moon, newly formed from the debris of a colossal collision long past, has cooled into a solid world of its own and taken its place in orbit around Earth. And with its arrival, motion awakens across the seas. The moon of this era hangs impossibly large in the sky, so large it dominates the horizon like a pale, cratered lantern. It orbits much closer than it does today, circling Earth rapidly, tugging relentlessly at anything that can move. And of all things on Earth, nothing is as willing to follow that pull as water. When the moon glides overhead, the ocean feels the faint but insistent tug of gravity. The water stretches upward, not dramatically, but enough to make a difference. A bulge forms, an early high tide. Then, as the moon rushes along its orbit, that bulge travels with it, dragging a gentle swell across the surface. The effect is subtle at first, but unmistakable. The oceans have begun to rise and fall, discovering a rhythm entirely different from the chaotic storms of earlier ages. Tides ripple across shorelines that barely exist, brushing against raw rocks and newly formed sands. They sweep mineral grains forward and backward, sculpting the edges of basins, widening narrow inlets, and wearing down cliffs softened by centuries of rainfall. Every day, though day is still a somewhat hurried affair in this era, the water reshapes the world in tiny increments, pushed not by wind or storm, but by the moon's quiet insistence. At this stage in Earth's history, the tides are far more dramatic than their future descendants. The moon's proximity amplifies its influence, pulling the oceans with an almost over-enthusiastic force. Water climbs higher along the coasts, retreating farther when the bulge passes. Shorelines become zones of constant rearrangement. Rocks tumble, Loose sediment shifts from place to place, and shallow pools form only to drain again hours later. The water is learning motion, not just presence, discovering patterns that will endure for billions of years to come. And though the ocean may not have opinions, if it did, it would probably find this constant back and forth a bit demanding. But the moon tugs, and the ocean politely follows. This new movement introduces mixing. The oceans have never experienced before. Water that once sat quietly in distinct chemical patches now begins to exchange contents with neighboring regions. A pocket enriched with certain minerals merges with a fresher zone, blending their chemistries. Salinity, still uneven and unstable, takes its first steps towards something more uniform, not because the ocean intends it, but because the moon gently persuades everything to mingle. Tidal forces also stir the deeper layers. The rising and falling water creates pressure changes that ripple through the basins. These fluctuations, though small, encourage minerals at the seafloor to settle differently, shifting in soft avalanches or drifting into suspension once again. Over centuries, the seafloor becomes subtly reorganized, shaped by the rhythmic breathing of the tides. The interaction between Earth and Moon also influences the crust itself. Tidal flexing, the gentle bending of Earth's surface under gravitational pull, affects the planet's early geology. Basins deepen slightly. Certain regions of the seafloor rise or fall. Volcanic activity, though quieter than in earlier chapters, adjusts to the rhythmic pressure. The ocean basins are not static bowls, but living, shifting dishes responding to the moon's steady influence. Meanwhile, the atmosphere observes all of this with its usual heaviness. Clouds drift sluggishly above, pushed here and there by winds that are learning to respond to temperature differences across the shifting water. In some places, the rhythmic movement of the ocean creates microclimates, pockets of slightly cooled air near retreating tides, warmer regions where water gathers and absorbs sunlight, even under the dim sky. The moon, simply by pulling on the water, is indirectly shaping the behavior of the air above it. The tides also sculpt quiet habitats along the shore, temporary pools that fill and drain, constantly refreshed. These pools trap minerals in high concentrations, warmed by sunlight and insulated by rock walls. They are not yet significant for life. Life is still far in the future, but they are significant for chemistry. These pools become little experiments of their own, places where evaporation increases mineral content and where water lingers long enough to explore new reactions. Earth is, without realizing it, preparing platforms for future innovation. The moon's influence extends beyond simple rising and falling. Because Earth rotates faster than the moon orbits, the tidal bulge is carried slightly ahead of the moon's position. This mismatch creates a tiny but persistent exchange of energy. Earth slows its rotation, and the moon slowly drifts farther away. But in this era, the effect is still in its infancy. The moon looms large, keeping the tides lively and the oceans engaged in constant sweeping gestures. With every cycle, the ocean grows more accustomed to movement. Waves become more confident. Currents begin to form, guided by the combined influence of tides and wind. Over immense periods, circulation patterns develop, not the globe-spanning conveyors of later ages, but gentle pathways of water that flow outward from regions the moon favors. The ocean, for the first time, holds both stillness and motion in balance. By the end of this chapter, Earth has found a new rhythm. The moon circles above, pulling at the seas with each pass. The oceans rise, retreat, stretch, and sigh. The shorelines evolve, their edges softened and rearranged by the lunar pulse. And in the quiet interplay between gravity and water, the planet discovers a kind of cosmic choreography, a slow, timeless dance that will continue for billions of years, shaping coastlines, climates, and eventually the lives that will come to depend on the tide's patient, predictable steps. The oceans, once content to rise and fall under the moon's guidance, now face a new teacher, temperature itself. Earth, no longer the blistering furnace of its earliest ages, has cooled enough for contrast to take hold. Heat seeps upward from the crust in scattered, glowing patches, remnants of a restless interior, while the atmosphere above begins shedding warmth into space, especially during the long, hazy nights beneath the heavy sky. These differences in temperature give the oceans their first lesson in true motion. At the surface, waters exposed to the cooling air contract slightly, increasing in density. Beneath them, pockets of water warmed by geothermal vents expand and rise, nudging against the cooler layers above. This gentle push and pull creates a slow but steady rearrangement of the water column. What begins as small swirls around warm vents becomes broader, planet-scale motions, vast, deliberate currents tracing paths across the basins. These early circulation patterns are nothing like the powerful conveyor belts of future oceans. They are quiet, almost meditative, as though the sea is learning to breathe in its own time. Water moves in looping arcs, rising in some places, sinking in others. The boundaries between warm and cool zones are soft, like watercolor gradients drifting into one another. Yet even with their subtlety, these currents reshape the ocean's character. A warm plume rising from a geothermal hotspot begins its slow journey outward. As it spreads, it pushes against the surrounding water, urging it to flow aside and away. This displacement sets off a chain reaction. Cooler waters, sliding down from the surface, move to fill the gaps left behind. The cycle continues endlessly. Warm water rising, cool water sinking, creating circulation cells that span entire basins. Nothing happens quickly, but nothing is idle. The atmosphere plays an important role in this newfound motion. Though still heavy and dim, it cools more efficiently than the ocean. At night, the surface waters lose heat to the sky above, forming a thin veneer of cooler water that drifts outward with the slightest encouragement. During the day, such as the term loosely applies in this era, the sun's filtered rays warm certain regions, especially those where clouds momentarily thin. These warm patches spread and mingle, fueling new currents at the surface. The planet has entered a stage where heat itself becomes the quiet architect of motion. The ocean is no longer a static basin of mineral-rich water, but a dynamic, circulating system redistributing energy across the globe. It becomes Earth's first climate engine, even if the climate is still little more than warm, warmer, and occasionally slightly less warm. As these currents travel, they bring with them dissolved minerals collected from shorelines and river mouths. Regions once chemically distinct begin blending more thoroughly. The uneven salinity of earlier ages softens into smoother gradients. In some places, currents concentrate certain minerals. In others, they dilute them. The ocean's chemistry, though still far from stable, becomes far more interconnected. Circulation also influences the shape of the atmosphere above. Warm patches of ocean release moisture into the heavy air, contributing to cloud formation. Cooler waters issue gentler evaporative plumes. These subtle shifts create differences in air pressure, which in turn guide winds. And the winds, meandering and curious, trace patterns across the sea, pushing surface waters into broader, more coordinated paths. It is a feedback loop, air guiding water, water guiding air, with no rush and no urgency, only the endless patience of a young planet finding its rhythms. Deep in the ocean, where sunlight never penetrates, the warm rising plumes from the crust meet descending streams of cooled surface water. These quiet collisions generate slow, sprawling eddies. Minerals drifting downward from the surface settle in spiraling paths, forming faint whorls on the seafloor. Over time, these patterns create subtle variations in sediment, recording the earliest signs of a circulating ocean. The deep sea, once an isolated realm, now participates in a global movement that unifies surface and depth. This circulation softens the extremes of temperature across the planet. Regions closer to geothermal hotspots no longer scorch the water into stagnation. The heat is carried away before it can build to overwhelming levels. Cooler areas, which once bordered on Chile by comparison, gain warmth from incoming currents. The ocean moderates itself, learning a kind of internal balance. Still warm, still heavy, but less prone to extremes than before. In places where rising warm water meets the shoreline, early erosion patterns shift subtly. Waves, guided by currents, begin wearing at new angles, smoothing edges and encouraging sediments to travel farther along the coast. Shallow pools fill and empty with a little more vigor, stirred not only by tides, but by the slow, inexorable push of horizontal flow. The planet becomes slightly more organized, its water learning not just to move up and down but sideways, across entire worlds. And as the ocean circulates, it develops a calm that is both deep and vast. There is no rushing, no roaring, no storms of consequence here. Only a slow, unhurried redistribution of warmth and mineral content. The atmosphere above drifts in companionable harmony, shifting gently as the water beneath it adjusts. This is Earth at its most contemplative. The oceans have learned not merely to exist, but to travel, to stretch across their basins, to wander from warm places to cold ones, to spread energy the way future forests will spread leaves. Nothing in this world hurries, yet nothing rests completely. In the soft motion of these early currents, the planet takes its first steady steps toward becoming a world with real climate, real complexity, and someday, real life. Below the surface, beyond the reach of the dim, rust-colored glow that manages to penetrate the heavy sky, the early oceans sink into an unbroken darkness. There is no shimmer here, no scattering of sunlight through blue water, because the ocean is not blue, and the sunlight never truly arrives. What faint illumination reaches the shallows is quickly swallowed by suspended particles and dissolved minerals long before it can descend into the deeper world. The sea below is a vast, warm dusk fading into pitch black, a realm that exists in permanent night. And in that darkness, one quality dominates: anoxia. The ocean contains no free oxygen, none dissolved, none drifting in from the atmosphere, none created by life. Because life has not begun to write its part in this story yet. The absence of oxygen shapes every chemical process in the water. It decides what dissolves, what clumps, what remains stable. The ocean behaves not like the life-filled waters of the future, but like a gigantic chemical cauldron, simmering quietly under pressure. Iron, freed from weathering rocks and carried by rivers and submarine vents, dissolves easily in this oxygen-free water. In later ages, oxygen would force iron to precipitate into reddish solids that fall to the sea floor. But not here. Not now. In this era, iron remains invisible, drifting through the depths as unreactive ions. The ocean becomes saturated with these hidden metals, turning vast regions into silent, mineral-rich reservoirs. If anyone could taste the deep sea, they might describe it as faintly metallic. But fortunately for early Earth, nobody is lining up for a sip. Despite the darkness and lack of oxygen, these waters are not still in the chemical sense. They are quietly, insistently active. Minerals are constantly dissolving, recombining, drifting, and separating again. Subtle temperature gradients cause reactions to proceed at different rates in different layers. Pressure, increasing steadily with depth, encourages some compounds to form and others to remain suspended. It is a world of ceaseless rearrangement, busy, but in the way someone sorting books at 3 a.m. is busy, quietly, steadily, with no intention of explaining the system to anyone else. The ocean is very busy chemically, but prefers not to talk about it. Temperature plays its own role in shaping this silent world. Warm plumes rising from the sea floor meet cooler layers that originated near the surface, creating zones where minerals precipitate for a moment before dissolving again as the currents shift. Some of these precipitates accumulate as soft sediments, layering the seafloor with thin blankets of dark material, rich in metals and silica. Others remain suspended in the water column, swirling gently in slow eddies, creating murky, indistinct layers within the darkness. Even without oxygen, the ocean holds surprising complexity. Carbon dioxide dissolves into the water in vast quantities, forming carbonic acid and driving the earliest acid-base reactions. These reactions determine how minerals behave, what stays dissolved, what deposits onto the seafloor, and what drifts downward with the slow fall of suspended grains. There is a sense of constant negotiation here, as though every molecule is participating in a quiet debate about its future location. The lack of oxygen also creates a world resistant to sudden change. In later times, a burst of oxygen would radically alter ocean chemistry. But in this early chapter, nothing arrives abruptly. The ocean maintains a steady, almost stubborn equilibrium. Without oxygen to disrupt reactions or create new pathways, the chemistry remains consistent in its patterns. Complex, yes, but predictable in its own dark way. Light, or rather the absence of it, contributes to the ocean's mood. Without photons penetrating the depths, there is no photosynthesis, no clustering of pigments, no movement toward brightness. Every layer of the ocean is ruled by temperature, density, and pressure, not by energy from the sun. The surface water, dimly illuminated, is the brightest part of a world that exists mostly in shadow. Below it, each meter deepens the darkness until sight would have been useless even to hypothetical eyes. Yet the ocean does not feel empty. It feels full of unseen chemical currents, full of suspended minerals, full of dissolved metals. It is a quiet fullness, the kind that hums rather than sings. The water glides slowly along pathways shaped by earlier circulation, drifting across basins and ridges. It never hurries. It never stalls. It moves with the confidence of a system that has found its preferred tempo. On the seafloor, hydrothermal vents continue releasing warm, mineral-rich fluid into the depths. In a later world, these vents would teem with life. Now they send plumes upward that collide with cooler water, creating faint shimmering columns that rise and then disperse. Iron, silica, and trace elements spread outward from these plumes, forming halos of altered chemistry around each vent field. These patches remain distinct for long stretches of time, unmixed by strong currents, but always nudged outward by the gentle circulation patterns established in earlier epochs. What little movement the ocean exhibits feels purposeful, though it has no purpose in mind. Warm layers slide past cool ones. Currents flow along density boundaries, and mineral gradients shift gradually across the basins. The ocean behaves like a massive organism in deep sleep, breathing, circulating, rearranging its chemistry with slow deliberation. And above all, it is quiet. A world without life, without oxygen, without light, yet full of internal motion. A world content to remain unseen, working tirelessly in darkness. In this long night beneath the waves, the ocean prepares, without knowing it, for future transformations far greater than anything in its current imaginationless chemistry. For now, its silence is complete, and in that silence, Earth's next chapter waits patiently, just beyond the edge of darkness. For millions of years, the oceans have darkened, deepened, and learned their rhythms quietly under the moon's pull and the planet's slow cooling. But peace in this era is never guaranteed. Overhead, our solar system remains a bustling construction zone, its planets still jockeying for stable orbits, its debris left over from formation drifting in unpredictable swarms. And some of that debris has Earth's name on it. What follows is a period of celestial turbulence known to future scientists as the Late Heavy Bombardment, a time when asteroid and comet fragments wander inward with alarming frequency. They strike Earth not as gentle pebbles but as mountains falling from the sky, each one arriving with more energy than entire volcanic provinces. The oceans, spread now across the basins like quiet, dark mirrors, must learn to endure forces far beyond any earthly storms. The first signs of the bombardment are flashes in the sky, brilliant streaks slicing through the haze before vanishing behind the horizon. Some burn up harmlessly, others do not. When a larger body makes impact, the ocean has no time for subtlety. Water erupts upward in towering plumes, vaporized instantly into superheated steam. Shock waves ripple outward, folding the sea into massive rolling walls that race across basins with unstoppable momentum. In some places, the heat of impact is enough to boil entire surface regions into vapor. For hundreds to thousands of kilometers around a major collision, the ocean's upper layers vanish into the sky, turning the atmosphere into a churning stew of steam, ash, and fractured minerals. The air becomes thick with vapor, glowing faintly from the infrared heat trapped within it. The heavy sky, already accustomed to burden, struggles to hold even more. The crust beneath the ocean does not escape unscathed. Impacts punch vast craters into the seabed, displacing hundreds of cubic kilometers of rock in a single strike. The basins deform, sometimes deepening permanently, sometimes tilting slightly, creating new gradients for future currents. Some underwater strikes expose pockets of molten material, sending fountains of glowing magma upward that solidify as they meet the cooling seawater, forming strange, bulbous structures on the seafloor. Yet for all this violence, the ocean itself refuses to be undone. After each impact, after every boiling episode, the water returns. Steam condenses. Rains fall. Rivers continue their slow delivery of minerals. The basins refill, as though the oceans simply pretend nothing happened, politely resuming their place as if vast quantities of them hadn't just been catapulted into the sky. The sea survives mostly by refusing to accept that it should stay gone. Between impacts, the ocean regains its calm remarkably quickly. The surface reforms, smoothing out from its upheaval into vast, quiet expanses once more. Sediments from shattered rocks settle onto the seafloor, forming bright layers that will someday tell stories of cosmic collisions. Chemical gradients re-establish themselves. Circulation resumes, still guided by heat from below and cooling from above, though occasionally rerouted by the altered geography of freshly carved craters. Meteoric iron and other extraterrestrial materials dissolve into the seawater, adding yet more elements to the ocean's growing chemical library. Some of these metals settle into deep basins, while others diffuse outward, joining the quiet chemical negotiations that define the anoxic depths. Comet impacts, meanwhile, bring their own cargo, icy fragments that melt instantly, contributing water, organic molecules, and volatile compounds to the ocean's mixture. The atmosphere, shaken repeatedly by these intrusions, grows thicker with steam and particles after every major event. For brief intervals, sunlight becomes nearly irrelevant, unable to reach the surface through the dense veil of post-impact haze. When the sky finally begins to clear, usually decades after a large collision, the surface waters experience abrupt temperature shifts as cooling resumes. These shifts prod the ocean into new patterns of circulation. Warm surface layers sink or disperse. Cooler layers rise in places they never did before. With every asteroid, the ocean learns something new about motion. Some impacts are large enough to temporarily sterilize entire surface regions, not of life, for none exists yet, but of chemical structures sensitive to heat. Yet even these regions recover. Water condenses. Minerals return. The heat dissipates into space. And the ocean quietly begins again. On land, if land can be defined in this era of unsteady crust, impact craters dot the young continents and island arcs. Ejecta blankets fall back to Earth, some splashing into the seas, some piling onto shorelines. These materials, hurled upward from deep inside the planet, bring new minerals to the surface. Rain washes them into the sea, diversifying its chemical makeup even further. As centuries stretch into millennia, the frequency of impacts begins to decline. The solar system gradually clears itself of lingering debris. Earth's orbit stabilizes. The violent streaks of fire across the sky grow less frequent, then rarer still. The oceans, having endured the chaos with their characteristic resilience, settle once more into their steady, dark existence. They carry the scars of this era in their chemistry and geology, but show no sign of reluctance to continue. And so the sea rests, warm and deep and patient. It has been vaporized, carved, stirred, and shocked, but never erased. It persists through sheer insistence, gathering itself again after every cosmic disruption, smoothing its surface with quiet dignity. In this chapter of Earth's history, the oceans learn endurance. Not the gentle endurance of tides or slow currents, but the fierce, stubborn endurance of something that refuses to disappear. They recover because the planet needs them. They return because they can. And as the last great asteroids complete their fiery descent and the skies begin to clear, the oceans, scarred but unbroken, prepare for the next transformation awaiting them in the long, unfolding story of Earth. The era of falling fire is fading. One by one, the great cosmic hammer blows diminish, until at last the sky grows quiet. No more mountains of stone descend from the heavens. No more seas erupt into pillars of steam that blot out half the horizon. Earth, for the first time in an astonishingly long while, finds itself with a moment to breathe, or at least cool without interruption. As the bombardment wanes, the heavy atmosphere begins a slow transformation. It is still thick and humid, still weighted with volcanic gases and the remnants of countless impacts, but it is no longer constantly replenished by new chaos. The intense heat released by collisions dissipates gradually into space. Steam condenses, particles settle. Chemical reactions, freed from the relentless churning of crisis, Start rearranging the sky into something slightly clearer, slightly more transparent, slightly more welcoming to sunlight. That sunlight, which for ages has struggled to do much more than cast a dim reddish haze over the world, finally begins to find pathways downward. At first, the change is barely perceptible. A hint of a brighter glow along the horizon, a softer edge to the shadows on the surface of the sea. But the planet notices. The atmosphere loses some of its earlier thickness, not enough to call it light, but enough to let the sun leave its fingerprints on the water. Surface waters, long accustomed to darkness and muted reflections, begin to reveal something unexpected. Color. Not the rich sapphire blues of later ages, nor the shimmering turquoise that future coral reefs will celebrate, but a faint, uncertain hint of blue, like the world is experimenting with the idea without fully committing yet. The color emerges in patches where the atmosphere above has thinned just enough and the water below has cleared just enough for sunlight to scatter in the right way. The clearing of the sky is not uniform. Some regions remain shrouded in haze, still burdened by lingering aerosols from old volcanic eruptions or the fine dust of distant impacts. Others briefly open into pale, translucent windows where sunlight slips through with surprising clarity. Over the oceans, these windows paint shifting patterns, brightening one expanse of water while leaving another in metallic gloom. The sea responds gently, reflecting back whatever light it receives, decorating its surface with ribbons of muted blue that move with the waves. With less steam in the air, the sky itself begins to change. Its old reddish-tan palette, born of dense clouds and suspended minerals, slowly fades into lighter tones. It is still far from truly blue, but the edges soften. The horizon grows paler. The oppressive ceiling above becomes less like a lid and more like a veil. For the first time, a hint of distance appears in the atmosphere, layers becoming visible rather than blending into one heavy mass. This new clarity brings cooler temperatures, especially at night. Without the constant thermal blanket of thick steam clouds, the surface loses heat more efficiently. The upper layers of the ocean respond by cooling slightly, and as they do, their transparency increases. Suspended particles settle more readily. Chemical reactions in the water adapt to the reduced temperatures, encouraging some dissolved materials to precipitate and drift downward. As impurities fall away, the surface becomes clearer, helping sunlight reach a little deeper, which in turn enhances the ocean's embryonic blue even further. Below the surface, the water is still as dark as ever, still anoxic, still busy with its own quiet chemistry. But near the top, in the thinnest layers touched by daylight, the ocean begins to reveal a gentler side. The interplay between depth, clarity, and scattering transforms that upper skin into a canvas capable of capturing the faintest hint of beauty. It is subtle, so subtle that, if you weren't paying close attention, you would hardly notice the shift. But for a planet that has worn only shades of fire and shadow until now, this delicate blue is revolutionary. The atmosphere, still thick with moisture, responds to the changing temperatures by forming clouds with new shapes, instead of the endless oppressive blankets of earlier epochs. The clouds start to fragment, broken patches drifting slowly across the sky, allowing beams of filtered sunlight to illuminate the ocean in shifting intervals. These openings create moving spots of brightness, like wandering lanterns drifting overhead. The world feels less claustrophobic, more layered, more open. Wind patterns adjust too. Cooler air descending from higher altitudes meets warmer currents rising from the ocean, creating gentle breezes that ripple the water's surface. These ripples catch the new light in playful ways, momentarily brightening the sea before dissolving again. Where the wind gathers enough strength, it forms small waves. Nothing dramatic, but enough to give the surface texture. These waves reflect the sky differently from their still surroundings, amplifying or dimming the emerging blue depending on their angle. Every day, the light lasts a little longer. Every month, the haze grows a little thinner. Every millennium, the planet becomes a touch more recognizable. And with each shift, the oceans respond as mirrors do, quietly, faithfully, changing themselves to match the world above. Slowly, the planet's first quiet beauty emerges. Not the flamboyant beauty of future forests or coral gardens or sky blue afternoons, but the soft, tentative beauty of a world stepping out of its long adolescence. A world learning that it can be more than molten rock and roaring storms. A world discovering color for the first time. The ocean, still warm and still chemically restless, embraces this new light with quiet composure. Its surface gleams faintly, carrying the planet's earliest blues, the gentle announcement that Earth is beginning to calm, beginning to cool, and beginning, at last, to see itself in a new light. With the sky clearing and the oceans beginning to show hints of blue, Earth turns its attention toward another, equally dramatic transformation, one happening deep beneath the crust. The planet's interior, still warm and restless from its formation and bombardment, begins to express that restlessness through movement. Not the gentle circulation of water this time, but the slow, persistent shifting of rock miles thick. And as the crust starts to rearrange itself, the boundary between water and land becomes a place of perpetual uncertainty. Welcome to an era when shorelines simply refuse to stay where they are. The earliest crust, once a thin and fragile skin, has thickened enough to behave more like a set of floating plates. These plates, patches of crust riding atop the still churning mantle, move with extraordinary patience. They drift a few centimeters a year, but over geological time, that drift becomes sweeping migrations. Some plates rise into broad, blocky protocontinents. Others sink back down, swallowed into the mantle's heat like cooling islands returning to a simmering broth. Protocontinents form from repeated volcanic activity and the gradual welding of smaller crustal fragments. These emerging landmasses are stony, jagged, and largely barren, but they represent the planet's first attempts at building true continents. At their edges, shoreline after shoreline takes shape, only to vanish again within a few million years as the land lifts, tilts, or sinks. The coastlines of this world, are fickle things. One century, a basin edge might lie exposed under a gray sky, etched with tide lines and patterns of evaporated minerals. A few million years later, that same region might be submerged beneath a shallow sea, the former shoreline buried beneath layers of sediment. The planet has no interest in maintaining consistency. The coastline tries to hold still, but Earth has other plans. Every shift in tectonic behavior reshuffles the interplay between land and sea. When a plate rises even slightly, the ocean withdraws, exposing wide swaths of seabed that glisten under the filtered sunlight. Rivers carve new paths across the freshly exposed land, transporting sediments into the retreating waters. Evaporation leaves behind white, crusted minerals that crack as they dry. For a moment, the world feels broader, its seas tucked neatly into deeper basins. Then, imperceptibly at first, the land begins to sink again. The ocean, following gravity's polite invitation, flows back over the low regions, reclaiming what it recently lost. Shallow seas spread across the surface of the proto-continents, forming warm lagoons that reach inland for hundreds of kilometers. These are seas without permanence, transient, shape-shifting, moving wherever the ground beneath allows them. The water that fills these newly submerged regions interacts with the crust in fresh ways. Minerals dissolve differently depending on whether a coastline is advancing or retreating. Where land dips beneath the sea, newly submerged rocks contribute a fresh influx of ions to the water. Where the sea pulls back, sediments settle and dry, forming crusts that will someday be carried away by tectonic uplift and scattered into different oceans entirely. Nothing stays in one place long enough to develop a routine. Heat from the mantle controls much of this motion. Where warm currents rise toward the surface, the crust tends to thin and sink. Basin floors deepen, pulling shorelines with them. Where cooler mantle regions dominate, the crust thickens and rises, forming plateaus and hinting at future continental cores. The ocean follows obediently, its edge flowing like a liquid ribbon that redraws the map quietly, without ceremony. These tectonic movements also influence the shape of the oceans themselves. As crustal plates shift, some basins widen while others narrow. Undersea ridges rise, forming barriers that temporarily redirect currents and create isolated marine pockets. Subduction zones, those regions where one plate dives beneath another, pull sections of ocean floor downward, altering depths and creating new slopes that water must fill. The sea responds to every change, its surface leveling itself endlessly, even as the ground beneath refuses to cooperate. Shallow seas become especially common during this era. They spread across continental shelves that are still forming, creating vast, warm expanses only a few meters deep in places. These seas are incredibly sensitive to tectonic motion. A slight uplift can drain them. A slight subsidence can refill them. They act like great tides in slow motion, swelling and shrinking with the shifting crust rather than the pull of the moon. In these shallow waters, sunlight penetrates more easily than in the deep ocean. Sediments swirl in loose suspension, giving the water a pale, murky quality where shoreline meets sea. Waves lap gently against raw stone, wearing it into sand one grain at a time. As the coastlines migrate, they leave behind layers of deposited material, thin sheets of silt, clay, and dissolved minerals that mark the old boundaries like ghostly signatures of previous shorelines. The movement of land and sea also affects the atmosphere above. Exposed land masses absorb heat differently than water, creating small but meaningful temperature contrasts that shape wind patterns. These winds, in turn, influence wave behavior along the ever-changing coasts. Nothing on the planet exists in isolation. Every adjustment ripples outward in a delicate chain of causes and effects. And yet, despite all this restless shifting, the world does not feel chaotic. It feels alive, settling into itself, learning how to distribute weight and shape its surface in ways that will define the next several billion years. The coastline, though forever wandering, contributes to this newfound liveliness. It moves in slow, graceful gestures, advancing, retreating, reshaping, like a dancer adjusting her position as the music changes. In this era, Earth becomes a planet of edges, of shifting margins between solid ground and open sea. Shorelines appear and vanish, rise and fall, never entirely loyal to the places they once occupied. They will stabilize someday, but not yet. For now, the boundaries of Earth wander freely, carving the first drafts of continents, while the oceans explore every opportunity to fill the spaces left behind. The long epochs of bombardment, boiling, cooling, churning, rising, sinking, and reshaping have finally delivered something remarkable to Earth. Stability. Not perfection, not calm, but a consistent enough world for chemistry to begin stretching its legs. The oceans, once fragile basins threatened by every cosmic mood swing, are now deep, persistent, and confidently present. They no longer vanish under heat, nor retreat from shifting crusts with the same vulnerability as before. They endure, and in their endurance they begin to gather potential. The water itself has become a mosaic of ingredients, enriched by countless cycles of erosion, mixing, venting, and evaporation. Minerals drift through its depths in a complex symphony of ions, carbonates, sulfides, metals, and silicates, each one participating in reactions that occur slowly, quietly, and endlessly. For billions of years, these interactions have been tentative, fragile, frequently disrupted by catastrophic events. But now, with the planet settling into a more predictable pace, these same reactions begin to follow reliable patterns. The ocean is still anoxic and dark in its deeper layers, but those layers are consistent, and consistency is the foundation upon which complexity can grow. Near the surface, where light now filters through in its faint blue hues, water columns stratify gently by temperature and density. The sun-warmed upper layers float above the cooler depths, creating gradients that hold steady year after year. These thermal boundaries, subtle yet enduring, shape the movement of dissolved minerals, encouraging certain molecules to accumulate near the surface, while others sink into the quiet darkness below. Every layer of water begins to feel distinct, a structured environment rather than a uniform broth. Along the seafloor, hydrothermal vents continue to exhale their mineral-rich fluids, sending warm plumes upward into the cold darkness. These vents, scattered across ridges and fractures, inject energy, heat, and chemistry into the deepest parts of the ocean. The rising plumes meet colder water and form swirling, turbulent columns where compounds merge, break apart, and recombine in ways unique to these environments. The vents act like natural reaction chambers, their heat driving processes that cannot occur in cooler waters. Slowly, they begin to carve out zones of concentrated chemistry, little pockets where conditions differ dramatically from the background ocean. And yet, even in these vibrant pockets, nothing is alive. Not yet. No cells drift upward. No metabolism hums in the darkness. But the ingredients of life, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, sulfur, are present in abundance, and the ocean circulates them with growing sophistication. Heat from vents creates upward flows. Gravity and cooling send water sinking. Lateral currents carry dissolved matter across entire basins. A warm plume that begins at a vent might, after a few centuries of slow travel, distribute its minerals thousands of kilometers away. Each journey adds to the ocean's complexity, blending isolated chemistries into a planetary scale experiment. Shallow seas contribute their own ingredients. Rainwater, in passing over young continental rocks, dissolves minerals new to the ocean's catalog. It brings chemical diversity that deep ocean vents cannot supply. Different balances of ions, different ratios of metals to silicates, different organic fragments delivered by meteorites or formed in the high atmosphere. Once these materials enter the sea, the tides and circulation carry them inward, sharing them across regions that would otherwise remain chemically isolated. The ocean, without intending to, has become a global mixing vessel, huge, layered, energized, and full of gradients ripe for exploration. Some regions are warm and slightly acidic. Others are cold and faintly alkaline. Some seafloors ooze minerals rich in iron and sulfur. Others accumulate blankets of silica fallen from higher layers. These differences create thousands of microenvironments, each one with its own chemical personality. And through all of this, energy flows steadily. Heat from below, weak sunlight from above, pressure pushing down, temperature gradients stretching across layers. These are the forces that coax molecules into new arrangements. Forces that, for the first time, persist long enough for rare combinations to become common, and common combinations to stabilize. There is, in this stage of Earth's story, a sense of anticipation, as if the planet itself is holding its breath. Every eddy carries nutrients into new spaces. Every mineral grain that settles onto the seafloor delivers another piece of a vast chemical puzzle. The oceans are no longer just reservoirs for dissolved rock. They are becoming reactors, each drop of water a tiny laboratory where molecular possibilities play out endlessly. Perhaps most important of all, disruptions have become mild compared to the violent past. The oceans are no longer periodically obliterated by planet-melting impacts or scalded into vapor by global cataclysms. Yes, volcanoes still erupt. Yes, meteors still fall. But these events no longer reset the entire system. They stir the pot, but they don't spill it. And so the ocean accumulates memory, not biological memory, but chemical memory. Patterns that persist for millennia, gradients that hold their shapes, cycles that repeat through the seasons. The water becomes a place where complexity can build upon itself rather than start from scratch again and again. Still, the ocean remains silent. No life stirs. No metabolism brightens the deep. But if the ocean were capable of excitement, this would be its moment of quiet thrill. It has assembled a cast of characters more diverse than anything the world has seen. It has prepared the stage with depth, structure, energy, and ingredients. It has cleared the skies enough to allow light, but not so much as to disrupt the vulnerable chemistry below. Something is coming. Something small, subtle, and world-changing. But for now, the ocean waits, deep, calm, and full of potential, holding its breath as chemistry grows bold enough to imagine more. In the quiet ages that follow, Earth enters one of its rarest moods, long, unbroken stability. After epochs of bombardments, boiling, cooling, shifting, and reshaping, the planet settles into an extended exhale. Nothing dramatic happens. No continents tear apart in spectacular fashion. No colossal impacts rewrite the surface. Instead, the world drifts through time with the unhurried grace of something that has finally found its balance. The oceans, deep, dark, and now profoundly experienced, move through this era with a kind of mature confidence. Waves rise and fall in steady rhythms, untroubled by catastrophic heat or sudden evaporation. The surface gleams under a sky that, while still heavy by future standards, has become predictable. Clouds drift without urgency, gathering moisture and releasing it in gentle rain cycles rather than the planet-wide deluges of the past. Each drop falls into a sea no longer fighting for survival, only continuing its ancient work of gentle transformation. Currents traverse the basins like soft, continuous thoughts. They move heat across the world, redistribute minerals, and guide newly stable temperature layers with slow deliberation. These currents never rush. There is no need. The gradients that drive them maintain their shape for millions of years, forming pathways that water follows again and again, like grooves carved into a familiar melody. Where warm water rises, cool water descends. Where minerals drift in from rivers, they are carried far out to sea. Where vents exhale their whispering plumes, the deep water responds with subtle, swirling motions. Nothing is idle, but nothing strains. This is the time before anything stirs with intention, before metabolism, before replication, before the smallest cell divides or a single spark of biochemistry dares to call itself alive. But the ocean doesn't mind. It waits, not impatiently, not anxiously, but with a kind of quiet readiness. It has gathered ingredients, sorted them, layered them, and tested their reactions for untold ages. Evolution hasn't arrived yet, but the ocean has already done the interior decorating. Sunlight, filtering through a clearing sky, paints the surface waters in soft, shifting hues. Those faint, early blues now deepen in certain regions as suspended particles continue to settle out. The upper ocean becomes clearer, not because anything living is helping filter it, but because stability itself encourages calm. Sediments accumulate slowly, unhurried by turbulent weather or sudden crustal collapse. In this serenity, the color of the sea becomes an increasingly reliable attribute, no longer a fleeting trick of light and haze, but a genuine emergence of the blues Earth will one day be famous for. Beneath the surface, the stillness feels different, not empty, but expectant. Chemical gradients maintain their delicate balances. Pockets of warmth near the seafloor rise gently toward cooler layers. Meeting zones where minerals cluster and disperse with mathematical subtlety. Hydrothermal vents continue to exhale their mineral-rich plumes, each one a prime location for molecular experimentation. None of these reactions amount to life yet, but they are complex, and complexity, given time, tends to grow more daring. The deep ocean, though devoid of light, is not devoid of motion. Slow, persistent currents carry ions and molecules through the darkness. Pressures immense enough to crush any modern creature act here not as threats, but as stabilizers, keeping reactions orderly, containing molecules within a tight framework of physics that encourages certain patterns and discourages others. The deep sea becomes a place of structure, where chemistry behaves with a quiet discipline. Near the shorelines, which now shift far more gently than in earlier ages, shallow waters warm under the thin sunlight. These regions form natural laboratories of a different sort. Evaporation pools, tidal flats, warm lagoons shaped by rising and sinking land. Each setting offers its own flavors of concentration and dilution. Minerals gather in high abundance along drying shore edges, then scatter when the water returns. Though life has not yet taken hold, the shorelines already resemble the future stages upon which biology will make its entrance. The air above the ocean undergoes its own subtle transformations. Water vapor cycles more predictably, forming stable weather patterns. Thunderstorms become rare, gentle showers more common. The sky is still hazy, but no longer smothering. On quiet days, the sunlight warms the air enough to generate soft breezes that glide across the water, sending ripples traveling outward in near-perfect symmetry. These breezes do little more than decorate the surface, but the ocean receives them calmly, its surface responding with gentle motion rather than upheaval. Seasonal cycles begin to form, not sharply, not dramatically, but rhythmically. Slight shifts in Earth's orbit and tilt create patterns of warmth and coolness that ripple across the oceans. The sea responds with delicate adjustments in current speed, density layers, and mixing depths. These changes are predictable enough to form long-term patterns, giving the ocean a cyclical nature that will one day influence the rhythms of life. Through all of this, the planet feels like it is holding its breath. Not because something imminent is bursting forth, but because conditions have finally become steady enough to allow the possibility of something unprecedented. Rare chemical chains persist long enough to be tested by time. Molecules accumulate in sheltered environments. Reactions grow just complex enough that, given a new catalyst or a bit more stability, they might take a crucial step forward. And so the oceans wait, patient, prepared, and quietly brimming with potential. They have assembled the stage, arranged the props, and dimmed the lights to the perfect level. All they need now is a spark. The stillness is not emptiness. It is promise. A long, poised inhale before the smallest revolution in Earth's history. At last, Earth enters an age defined not by chaos, not by fire or upheaval, but by dominance of water. From horizon to horizon, the oceans stretch uninterrupted across most of the planet's surface, calm yet immense, their quiet breathing setting the tempo for everything else. The continents, still mere suggestions of land compared to the sprawling masses they will eventually become, rise only modestly above the waterline, silhouettes against a sky that has finally learned restraint. In this era, Earth is unmistakably a world of water, vast and steady, carrying within its depths the echoes of every transformation that came before. The oceans now possess a maturity that earlier ages lacked. They are no longer hesitant visitors liable to evaporate, drain, or vanish under calamity. They are fixtures of the planet, deep, confident, and persistent. Their surfaces mirror the clearing sky in soft hues of blue and gray, shifting with each ripple as winds glide across them. Beneath the surface, layers of water stack neatly according to temperature and density, forming an architecture that remains stable over millennia. Even the deepest trenches hold their quiet identity, cold, heavy, and ancient, but reliable in their stillness. Earth's climate, shaped intimately by these oceans, becomes predictable in the broadest sense. Warmed gently by the sun's filtered rays, the upper waters absorb heat and distribute it across the globe through slow currents. Cooler regions settle into their own patterns. This circulation no longer fluctuates wildly. It repeats, steadies, and forms enduring routes through the basins. The oceans act as an enormous memory system, storing thermal energy, smoothing extremes, and guiding the planet toward equilibrium. The atmosphere now moves in partnership with the sea, rather than in opposition. Winds drift in steady bands, influenced by the broad temperature contrasts generated by the ocean's surface. Clouds form and disperse with gentle deliberation. Rain falls not as a relentless deluge, but as a moderated cycle, replenishing rivers and carrying minerals back into the water with patient consistency. The great tantrums of earlier ages have faded into the background, replaced by a sense of long-term coordination between air and sea. Geologically, the crust continues its slow rearrangement, but without the dramatic landscapes of the planet's youth. Proto-continents drift at a leisurely pace, rising a little here, sinking a little there, shaping coastlines that shift over millions of years rather than thousands. Where land meets water, shallow seas expand across continental shelves, forming wide plains bathed in sunlight. These coastal regions offer unique chemical environments, zones where minerals can concentrate, dissolve, and recombine in ways not possible in the open ocean. But even these changes occur with patience. The world is no longer frantic. Within the oceans, chemistry becomes increasingly rich. The water holds a staggering assortment of dissolved substances accumulated from rivers, vents, and atmospheric reactions. These ingredients do not behave randomly. They organize themselves into gradients, patterns, and cycles. Warm waters carry certain ions outward, while cold, descending currents bring others into the depths. Hydrothermal vents continue to sculpt chemical microenvironments along the seafloor, releasing heat and minerals in steady plumes. Shifting tectonic ridges supply new pockets of complexity. Everywhere, chemistry experiments quietly in the dark. This is not the restless experimentation of earlier ages, when reactions were constantly undone by planetary turmoil. It is chemistry under conditions of persistence. Chains of molecules remain intact for long periods. Patterns repeat. Energy sources, sunlight at the surface, geothermal heat below, continue without interruption. If the ocean were a thinker, this is when its thoughts would begin to linger long enough to become ideas. Above all, the planet feels poised, balanced between what it has been and what it has not yet become. There is no life in these waters, no metabolism stirring in the deep or drifting at the surface. But everything else is ready. The ingredients are abundant. The energy flows are steady. The physical environment is stable but dynamic enough to encourage new combinations. After billions of years of fire, steam, bombardments, boiling, shifting crusts, and swelling seas, Earth has finally created a setting where something delicate might endure long enough to matter. The ocean, vast and serene, does not know this. It rests in its stability, unaware of its own preparedness. It carries no expectations, no anticipation of the transformation waiting quietly beyond the horizon of time. Its waves roll with patient rhythm. Its depths hum with silent chemistry. Its currents weave through the basins like threads preparing a loom, not knowing what tapestry will one day emerge. If the ocean had a sense of humor, and by now it certainly deserves one, it might remark that it has tidied up every corner, organized the shelves, set the lighting to inviting, and now waits for guests who haven't yet learned how to arrive. Evolution hasn't stepped forward, but the stage is unmistakably set. And so Earth rests, a world of water, poised at the very edge of the smallest revolution in its history. Soon something will learn to take advantage of all this preparation. Something small, something fragile, something that will change everything. But for now, the ocean simply breathes, steady, deep, and unaware that within its calm embrace, the future is about to find its first home.